Today I want to show you 3 easy sewing projects that will help you to explore Japanese culture a little bit more. In case you're here for the first time, my name is Matsunaga and I'm a fully trained and certified kimono teacher and stylist. In my training to become a kimono teacher, I had to study the basics of tea ceremony. Not that I could do a tea ceremony, but I can go to a tea ceremony as a guest and probably go through the whole process without making too many mistakes. At least it's what I'm hoping. When you go to a tea ceremony, there are a few things you have to bring by yourself, and those are luckily all items you can also make by yourself. No worries, it's a super easy sewing project and all of them can not only be used for tea ceremony, you can also use them in your daily life to bring a tiny bit of Japanese culture and tradition in your own lifestyle. So let's get started with the very first sewing project. We're going to start with the so-called kaishi-ire. Kaishi-ire is a tiny bag where you can put kaishi in. Kaishi is just simple paper that is used as a replacement for plates in tea ceremony. And when you attend a tea ceremony, you're actually supposed to bring your own, by the way. And this is why you have them nicely stored in a kaishi-ire. When you look for kaishi-ire, you can buy online. They're very often made of kinran fabric, but also other fabrics. I also find cotton kaishi-ire, and I also find kaishi-ire made of leftover kimono fabrics. So basically everything is fine. But when you use a fabric like a leftover kimono fabric or quilting cotton, keep in mind that kinran actually is quite stiff and you could consider to put an interfacing onto that cotton or silk or whatever you're using to stiffen that fabric a tiny bit more. I picked up this fabric for this video in Kyoto. The problem is that, and I did not know that or didn't notice, this fabric has an up-facing pattern this way, and you can see this is the shortest side. I don't have enough length to actually finish the kaishi-ire because a kaishi-ire is made of just one long strip of fabric you fold down and sew in place. It's actually one of the easiest sewing projects you could ever do. It's gonna be a tiny bit patchwork, but you know what? I'm actually quite thrilled. I think this will turn out actually super cute. So I'm just gonna cut this out and sew those two together, and we're just gonna pretend that I would have one long strip of fabric of the same fabric. I start with a 20 centimeter wide and 80 centimeter long fabric. Then I folded in the fabric for 1 centimeter on both sides. And sewed this in place. Then I marked out a 9 centimeter from the edge on the wrong side of the fabric and folded the edge in along this line. I turned the fabric and folded in the edge once more for those 9 centimeter. Then I pinned this roughly in place so it would stay like this, and I could do the same step on the other side of the fabric. Then I folded the whole strip of fabric in half, and notice that I first should mark out my 1 centimeter seam allowance on both sides before pinning the left and right side together. And then I sewed those two sides down along my marking. Lastly, I cut off the corners to reduce bulk when turning it inside out. As always, I start turning in the corners first, and then I turn the whole thing. Make sure to also turn inside out the bottom half and the separations. I did this off camera, but don't forget to press your finished Kaishiire. This Kaishiire is not only perfect to fit kaishi. I'm, by the way, a big kaishi fan, so I'm probably mostly gonna store kaishi in this, but I was super happy to find out that my passport fits into this. So chances are great that this is going to be my new traveling buddy. The next project we're gonna make is a so-called Skiapukuro. Skiapukuro is like a tiny bag you use to put in things, of course, for example, your Kaishiire and other things you need for a tea ceremony. And then you have always your Skiapukuro set for a tea ceremony you probably would go to, and would have to bring things like your own kaishi or your own little fork. You could also put in your Goshuincho. This is a book filled with stamps from all the shrines you have visited while traveling through Japan. Or what you would also put into this is, for example, when you go to a wedding, you will have to bring money that is already put into an envelope, and you would put that envelope in the so-called Skiapukuro, and then when you're there at the front to register for you being there or attendance or whatever, you would take it out of the Skiapukuro and give the envelope to the people who are doing the registration of guests. Having a Skiapukuro is definitely super convenient, and I have pulled out a tutorial that looked rather easy to do, so let's see how we're gonna do on that one. I started with measuring out 1 cm seam allowance on fashion fabric and lining, which were cut into 35 cm squares. Obviously, most Skiapukuro are nowadays closed with a magnetic snap, so I thought I would give this a try. To attach the first half of the snap, I folded the fabric in half so it forms a triangle, and then measured 9 cm into the fabric from one corner. Because Kindan fabric frays easily, I put some fusible interfacing onto this spot before making holes into the fabric to install the snap. By the way, you should put the thicker side of the snap onto this fabric. I attached the wrong side. It's still working though, it's good enough. On the lining, I marked out 7 cm from one corner of the seam allowance, and did the same on the opposite side. Then I connected those 2 points with a line. From this line, I drew another line 1 cm apart from it towards the corner. Then I aligned fashion fabric and lining and cut along the second line to cut off a corner, which I did completely wrong here, so hold on and give me a second to fix this. First, I attached the second half of the magnetic snap onto the lining. I put this right onto the center of the line that I had marked out. And then I had to fix my mistake because I cut away the wrong corner of my fashion fabric. I aligned the two fabrics again, cut away the correct corner, and then reattached some fabric onto the other side so I would have a corner there. For the record, for the fashion fabric, you cut off the corner on the opposite side of the button. For the lining, it is the corner with the button. Then I started to fold the two layers into shape. Because the footage with the fashion fabric was even too confusing for me, the one who made and filmed this, I'm going to show you this step on the lining only. On the lining, you fold the corners without button together and pin it in place along the seam allowance marking. Then you sew this in place. After that, you fold the other two corners without button together and again pin them along the seam allowance marking. This is then sewed together, but leaving 5 cm in the center of the seam open. The only difference for this step on the fashion fabric is that you fold together the left and right corner of the corner with the attached button, and that you sew all of those seams without leaving an opening. This is how the two layers should look like, with the opening in the seam on the lining. I turned the lining inside out and put it into the fashion fabric. I made sure that the unsewn sides fit in length. Then I pinned the unsewn sides together, again along the seam allowance marking. And all of these sides is what you will have to sew together. I started to sew the side with the button, and no tutorial mentioned this, but I will. I recommend using a zipper foot on your machine there. The other two sides are then sewed down with a regular sewing machine foot. And the last step that was left was turning the whole Skiapukuro inside out through the tiny opening in the lining, and then sewing that lining opening closed. Anyway, I left the tutorial I followed mainly in the description down below. The video is in Japanese, but the steps are shown way more clearly than I did, so it will clear some things up. Seriously, the last ironing was extremely important. I really pressed it down into the shape I really wanted it and kept my iron on the fabric for a while so it will stay in shape, because this is 100% polyester and it really doesn't keep shape. Besides that, I'm actually really happy. It's not perfect, not at all, but I am so happy how this turned out, and my kaishi fit in perfectly in this. And also my goshuincho fits perfectly in this. I'm so happy. Isn't this so cute? I'm definitely gonna use this. The Skiapukuro already gets the most use of all the items I made in this video. I'm using it with my goshuincho, and I'm also using it when I have to go somewhere where I have to bring a money gift in an envelope. But recently, I'm mostly using it to bring books I'm reading everywhere I go. And finally, we are going to make the last sewing project of this video, which is a so-called kobukusa. Kobukusa is basically just a handkerchief made out of cloth. And it is very often used in tea ceremony as some kind of a coaster. Depending on the teacup, you would put the teacup on a kobukusa and drink it. You also use kobukusa when you want to look at, for example, very old teacups or other tea ceremony items, because you're not supposed to touch them all over with your hands. You would put them again on a kobukusa and look at them. Depending on the tea ceremony school, they might use a dashi bukusa instead of a kobukusa. A dashi bukusa is basically just a kobukusa way bigger. And I thought we probably get more use out of a kobukusa since you can use them as normal coasters. Kobukusa in history were very often made of imported fabrics. For example, kinran, the fabric I'm using for all of the projects in this video, or kando, or even donsu. Those fabrics were imported and they were used by famous tea ceremony masters during tea ceremony because there are a lot of small items that also need some scrap fabric to be made of. And sometimes some of the patterns on those fabrics that were used by famous tea ceremony masters still have the name of that tea ceremony master. For example, Rikyu Donzu, which is this pattern, and it is named after the very famous tea ceremony master Sen Rikyu. But no worries, you don't need to use any of those Japanese fabrics to make a kobukusa. You can use any fabric you have around and you like, because still keep in mind those were scrap fabrics that were imported. So every scrap fabric that is imported should be actually fine. For the kobukusa, I cut out a 17.5 long and 37 centimeter wide fabric. And then I marked out 1.5 centimeter seam allowance on all sides. I folded this in half and pinned the three sides together. Those were then sewn in place. But I was leaving again a 5 centimeter opening in the seam of one side to be able to turn this inside out later. After snipping the seam allowance corners off to reduce bulk in the corners, I turned in the corners first. And then pulled everything through the small opening I had left open. Lastly, I blind stitched the opening close by hand. Since I'm not practicing tea ceremony, I don't have any nice tea bowls to show how this would be used traditionally. So enjoy the ways I'm using this right now in my daily life. If you like this video, leave me a thumbs up or tell me below in the comments. And when you're here for the first time and you want to learn more about kimono and Japanese culture from a professional kimono teacher, please feel free to subscribe. I would be super happy to have you here, and I talk to you in my next kimono adventure. Bye!